Welcome again, our video friends. We hope that all of you are well and prospering and praying the Lord's blessings to be upon you. And we're, as you can see, trying to capture a little bit of the scenic beauty this time of the year and hope that it can be a blessing to you as you look at some of the beautiful colors. I know some of you probably can't get out and see sights like this, and I know lots of times you can see them on TV. I hope this can be a blessing to you as well, though. We are on a place called Persimmon Ridge Road in the mountains of South Carolina this morning. It's a beautiful road. It's a lot of game management land up and down this road, um, and very little traffic on it this morning. And so it's a beautiful part of South Carolina, and so we appreciate it so much. Well, we're studying today in the book of Genesis, chapter 25, the sale of the birthright. And we'll look down here in verse 29. And Jacob sod pottage. That means he had prepared some of the vegetables that he had for a meal. And Esau came from the field, and he was faint. Now, Esau, as you know, he was a hunter. He was a man who lived off the wild game, and his daddy loved the venison that he brought to him. And but any of you who've ever hunted know you don't get something every time you go hunting. Just doesn't happen. And sometimes, if that's what you're counting on to get you through the winter, you might have a slack period of time. You might be kind of hungry. And so here it was. Esau came in from hunting and had nothing to eat, and he was faint. I mean, I doubt he would have died from this at all, but he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint." Therefore was his name called Edom. Well, he makes a request, doesn't he? And as he makes this request, I guess he has no idea of the reply that was going to come from Jacob. Now, Jacob, his name means trickster, supplanter. And we're going to see the first move of Jacob right here in so doing that. Now, years had passed at this time from the birth. These boys were probably in their early 20s, I would imagine, at this time when this happened. And here is Jacob, well knowing of what the birthright was, what it meant to have, and to be the firstborn. And we didn't really know or understand the scriptures until now that the blessing of the birthright could be bestowed upon one beside the firstborn. But right here we're going to see that unfold in the scriptures. So we learn from the scriptures as we go that this birthright and this blessing of the father upon the younger could be transferred to the younger, as we're about to see. Now, this birthright, as I've said before in our studies, is not something we really practice today. I have a will. In my will, my children are given equal of whatever my state is when I'm gone. I'm not like Abraham. Abraham gave all that he had to his son Isaac, and he gave gifts unto all the other sons. But he had his purpose in that. There was a great purpose in that. But in America, most of the time, in our culture, in our generations, we just do not practice put much to do with the firstborn at all, as far as the birthright and all the blessings that went with it in time past, going with it in our day. And so it's a different culture that we study about here, and the birthright was handled differently in those days and not thought of much at all in our day and time. It doesn't, for most people, like me, they divide their possessions up equally among the children when they pass by the will. And if they don't do it, the probate judge will do that very thing. If you don't have a will and you pass, the probate judge is pretty much going to have everything sold and divided up between your children. So you can either get you a will, and I'd advise you to get a will. It doesn't cost much to get a will and to make a will out so that your wishes would be observed when you're gone. But in this day and time, the birthright carried great importance, and actually it also carried great wealth. Now, Jacob, he knew this. He knew very well that this birthright carried with it a great sum of wealth, because his father Isaac was very wealthy. and he knew that that wealth would go to his brother Esau, so he began to ponder this in his heart, and to probably seek an opportunity to get it. And right here, the opportunity presented itself, and we're gonna see one who wanted it and one who didn't care about it. And let's read on here, and perhaps we can see a little bit more of why that God said, Esau have he hated, and Jacob had he loved. Let's read on here, and verse 31. And Jacob said, "Sell me this day thy birthright." What about that? Jacob said, "Sell me thy birthright." Now, the birthright actually it also carried with it the priesthood as being the head of the family in that day and time before the Aaronic priesthood was given, and also it held the Edenic promise of the Satan bruiser within that, and also the promise of the fulfillment of the covenant that God made with Abraham was held within that birthright to the firstborn as well. And so there were three very, very distinct things that would accompany the birthright at this time. And it's a little hard for me to understand these blessings that the Father put upon the children in this day and time that actually were fulfilled in their lives. We can also see some of the curses that came upon some of these children and how that was fulfilled. And I couldn't imagine a Christian parent cursing their children. I just couldn't imagine that happening. I can see and know many who have asked God to help their children and not to bless their evil ways, and I could see praying that. But I've never known of a Christian person who would desire to put a curse upon their children. But you find that in the Old Testament at times. And then these blessings and curses were carried out in their lives. And so I don't think there's anything that we should try to follow right there except to bless our children and ask God on their behalf. But now if you look right here, Jacob wants that birthright. I'm sure he's considered the Abrahamic covenant. He's old enough to understand that. I'm sure he understands perhaps the promise of the Messiah through that line. I'm sure he also understands the wealth, the financial wealth that would come with this birthright. So he wants it. I mean, he wants it. And so he says, "Sell me this day thy birthright." I was the firstborn son to my father in this world. There were two other sons younger than I. I was the firstborn of the sons. I had a sister who was older than I am, but as far as the sons, I was the oldest born son. And currently, I'm the oldest living male of my family. For right now, there are no others in our line that are older than I am, and I'm not that old of a guy. But actually, that birthright is insignificant in our day and time. Insignificant as far as any of the things we study about here doesn't apply to me, wouldn't apply to you. And as far as being the oldest son, I guess there's a little bit of honor to be held about that. And perhaps others, my brothers, might look up to me a little bit. I don't know. But there's very little that goes along with being the firstborn in our day and time. And so, but in this day and time, it was very different and very important. And Jacob wanted that. Verse 32, and Esau said, "Behold, I am at the point to die." Now, I doubt he really was, but I think he thought he was. What profit shall this birthright do to me? Now, he must have really, really been asleep. I mean, he must have really been tired from his hunting. He must have been really given out from it. And but then he considered this birthright of such a little value. We see this. Let's read another verse right here. He says, "What good's this going to do me? I'm a hunter. I'm ready to die. If I don't get something to eat, I'm going to die." Could you imagine him so seriously there, being so hungry and faint before Jacob, his brother, that Jacob doesn't give him anything to eat without first him selling that birthright? So we pretty much see two guys right here. Uh, uh, Neither one of them being too honorable, except one desires something that is very, very important, and the other counts it of no importance. Let's look on right here. And Jacob said, "Swear to me this day." And he swore unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. What about that? So with this doing right here, with this goings on right here, Esau sold that birthright, and Jacob received it. Verse 34, then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, bread and peas, that's what that is. And he did eat and drank, and rose up and went his way. It's like nothing had ever happened. He'd never done a thing. Thus Esau despised his birthright. For a mess of pottage and a piece of bread, that's what he sold it for. Imagine that. And that's exactly what he did. Great wealth, great honor, great position, great respect, beyond what you could ever imagine, the place, the importance of that birthright. And yet Esau sells it for a bowl of peas and a loaf of bread is about exactly what he sold it for, and something to drink. He rose up and went his way as if nothing at all had ever happened. Well, I'm telling you what, that's something to think about, isn't it? And thus Esau despised his birthright. He counted that as nothing, Meant nothing to him. He said, what's that to me? I'm about ready to die. What's that to me? And I tell you right now, we could stop and think about a message right here about how cheap we sell off many things for in our life, and count it as nothing. We can see people selling off their testimony as if though it was nothing for a bowl of pottage, laying aside many, many years of their life and testimony as a Christian, as if though it was nothing but a piece of bread and a bowl of peas. And how many times people trade off their birthright in the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm talking about their testimony, and how they trade it off and let it to be scarred for something that's no more than just a bowl of peas. What about that? That's something to think about, isn't it? Right here, Esau sold some great, great, valuable things. And thus Esau despised his birthright. He counted that as nothing to him. My friends, you ought to count your testimony as if though it really means something to you. We ought to count our testimony before the Lord as if though it means the world to us, and it should. We should value our Christian testimony before the lost, before the ungodly, before the heathen of this world. We ought to count our testimony as being that which is very, very special and above board. I know none of us are perfect, and we'll never be in this world. None of us are. But we ought to value our testimony. We ought not to be known as a curser or a drinker or a whoremonger or a thief or a liar on the side. Our testimony ought to be good. We make a debt down at the bank, we ought to count that as something that we would honor, something that we would pay regardless of what. And I remember one house I borrowed money on, not my personal house, but another house. And the market just hit the bottom about the time I finished that house. And I was stuck with that house and making the payments on it, and knowing that I'd never make any money on it because the interest would eat up the profit. But nonetheless, I stuck with that, and I think the Lord had blessed me in those regards. And I'd made an agreement with the bank. I had others, friends of mine, said, I'll just let it go back to the bank. You can't help that. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I gave him a word that I'd make those payments, and I'd pay this back until the house is sold. And so it's been a long trip, but the Lord has blessed me with it. I certainly haven't had to call the bank and say, come get it. It's yours. I can't pay you back. But the Lord will bless you. You ought to count your testimony as that which is very important. And when when we're presented with temptation in this world, whether it be that of adultery, or you ought to think about that. So wait a minute, I've got a testimony. My children will be looking at me. My neighbors will be looking at me. The people at the church, They're going to hear about this sooner or later. They're going to find it out. We ought to value our testimony as more than a loaf of bread and a pot of peas, more than one night of pleasure, more than one moment to grab the money and to run with it. And then, too, when it comes to financial dealings, you ought not to cheat your brother, just kick him under the bus the first time the opportunity arises. You ought to do what's right with your brother instead of getting terribly greedy in the matter. So there's a lot to learn right here about Esau despising that birthright. My friends, we're out of time. May God bless you and help you along the way.